All right. I also wanted to point out that an email went out with the material for this morning's session. If you have not had a chance to maybe quickly grab those materials and have them in a place where you can reference them later, we will be going over some of them, and they're kind of for your reference and to refer back to as we move away from this session too. So going to turn the presentation over now to Carrie England, the Executive Director for California's State Independent Living Council, to get our conversation going. Take it away, Carrie.
Great. Thank you so much, Russell. This is Carrie England, Executive Director. We so appreciate the invitation to present to you today. And it's so nice. I recognize most of your names. I have not gotten a chance to meet you in person. So it's nice to connect with you this morning. I'm actually going to turn it over to Peter if he is ready to do some introductions and tell you a little bit of general information about the Silk.
Peter Mendoza, I'm the chair of the Silk. Thanks for, apologize for the momentary background noise. I thought I had everything silent. But first I want to take a moment to really thank you all for letting us present to you today, and also to express my deep appreciation for our Silk team and all the members. In particular, I want to pay homage to Fiona, who has done such an excellent job during her tenure and has been a great support to me as well, and really shepherding the Silk forward as her role as both a member and former or retired Spill Committee Chair, retired Silk member. She has been an excellent ambassador to independent living and advocating for ILC throughout the state. And she really served us well, both people with disabilities and the entire state of California. So just to go over a couple of things. First, we really want this to be an interactive presentation. We tried to really include a lot of information, but we want folks to be free to ask questions. I may not be able to see questions in chat or if someone raises their hand. So if Carrie or Russell could let me know, I would appreciate it. But we just want this to be a kind of relaxing, entertaining presentation to really let you know how important not only what the Silk does, but how you all fit in the Silk and how much we value you as a network and the work that we do as a state. Okay, so I wanted to go over a few things. The Silk stands for State Independent Living Council. There is a Silk in every state and U.S. territory. And we have 3 full-time employees, as was referenced earlier. Carrie England, our executive director, Cheryl Kasai, our legislative specialist, and Daniel Hess, who's our office manager. And we are actually part of the administration, which means that we have a direct link to the governor. We're appointed by the governor. And there are 18 members appointed to the Silk. Members are recruited and asked, members are asked to apply or can apply directly to serve on the Silk by finding the governor's office website. And we can provide you the website information as well. The mission of the Silk is to create policy and system change for independent living, which is, really important in our work in advocacy. The Silk's vision is to influence policy and access service delivery for individuals with disabilities in California. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Carrie, who's going to talk about the independent living philosophy and the independent living movement. Take it away,
Thanks.
Carrie, when you're ready.
Great, thanks, Peter. So when I get excited about a topic, I tend to start speaking very quickly. So if you need me to slow down, please don't hesitate to let me know. So I wanted to start off the presentation with a topic that you're probably all familiar, at least I hope you're all familiar with. And that's the difference between IL philosophy, IL movement, and IL program, because I think you really need to understand the difference to understand how the silk fits into the system. So I always think of IL as threefold. It's the program, the movement, and the philosophy. So the movement, of course, started as early as the 1940s as a grassroots movement. It started primarily with parents of people who experienced disabilities who wanted to make sure that their children were not institutionalized, and kind of grew through the years to include more and more folks who had concerns about about their children primarily living independently in the community rather than being placed in an institution. And as time went on and the civil rights movement came about, independent living really fit right into the civil rights movement as demonstrations were occurring. And, I could talk about this topic all afternoon. This is like one of my passion topics. So I'm really trying to kind of tone it down here. If you want to talk more about it, any of these topics, please contact me after the presentation, and I'm happy to chat with you at length about it. So the move away from mandatory institutionalization continues today, and we saw some real progress with the Americans with Disabilities Act in the 1990s. But as you know, there's still a lot of need for the movement, for the civil rights portion of IL. Now, as a philosophy, when we talk about IL, it's really that concept of nothing about us without us. The concept that decisions about people with disabilities should not be made without them at the table, that they are the best experts on disability. And so for us at the Silk, what this translates to is that at least 51% of our members are people with disabilities or can represent people with disabilities. We are lucky at the Silk. At least 90% of our members and staff are people with disabilities. So we have a really high rate. Now for the program, IL is also a program which is administered in California by the Department of Rehabilitation. The work is conducted by the Independent Living Centers, by CFILC, and by the Silk. And funding and goals for the program are outlined in the State Plan for Independent Living, also known as the SPIL. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later this afternoon or later this morning. So I just wanted to kind of outline those three before we moved on, because sometimes when we start talking about IL, we're thinking specifically philosophy, or we're thinking specifically program. And it's really important that we remember that it's really encapsulated by the three different areas. So before I move on, does anybody have questions? I'm not seeing anybody. I don't hear anybody, so I'll move on. I wanted to give you a little bit of background about how the Silk got established. So the Silk was originally established as an advisory committee to the Department of Rehabilitation. Actually, it was called the Independent Living Advisory Council, or the ILAC. That role changed in the early 90s, in 1992, specifically when the amendments to the Rehabilitation Act were put into place. And those amendments required states to establish autonomous statewide independent living councils in order to retain their federal funding for independent living services. So at that time, DOR had been running it just like any of their advisory councils. And the state said, no, we're going to make this a state agency. So in 1996, Governor Pete Wilson signed an executive order, which I did include in your materials. It's Executive Order W13396. It's interesting that we were set up as a state agency. We are one of only a handful of silks that is an independent state agency. Most silks in the country are nonprofit organizations. There's benefits, there's pros and cons to being a state agency. In California, we, as Peter explained, we have a direct line to the governor, which is a definite pro to being a state agency. But there's also some cons to it as well. We don't have the ability to do the lobbying and do a lot of the advocacy as a state agency that nonprofit organizations can participate in. So that makes us a little bit different than silks across the country. And so if you're looking at silks, it's like apples and oranges, right? It's like the independent living centers. They're all very similar, but there are differences. And so it's just important to understand that we are a state agency, but we also operate with full autonomy, which means that we make all of the decisions about our staffing, about our programs, about our funding. So I think that that's probably the key point that I want you to take away from this part of the presentation and this executive order is that it does make us an independent state agency. Any questions? I'm just going to stop periodically after each topic to check in on questions. So I hope that that doesn't start to get, annoying to you, but I just really want to make sure that if you have questions, you feel free to ask as we go. So I want to talk a little bit about our council members and the duties and responsibilities of being a council member. So our members, as Peter described, are governor appointed. They serve up to 2 3-year terms. They can serve for 6 years total. We have 18 members on the silk. 14 are voting members and 4 are considered ex officio members. Those are non-voting members. They're still governor appointed and they still have a say in our committees and they provide us with a lot of updates on their programs and services. Again, all members of the silk must be people with disabilities or people who can represent people with disabilities. So often that is somebody who works at an independent living center, maybe somebody who is a family member of a person with a disability, or otherwise can represent the needs and interests of people with disabilities. On the silk, we really try to make sure that it's people with disabilities themselves, because again, you know the best about what's good for you. So we want to make sure that people with disabilities are represented. Our members also represent the various demographics of the state. And so we really strive for diversity, not only in race and ethnicity, but in sexual identity, in every aspect, in religion, in political affiliation. I mean, we really take a look at everybody's information and try to make sure that our state is well represented because our state is so diverse. And so we want to make sure that we have representatives from the true north, as Russell put it, and representatives from the south and from the middle of the state and everywhere in between. And so that's part of when we're doing our recruitment for the silk. It's not always based on like, wow, you're a really great person, we want you on board. It's sometimes based on you're a really great person and you happen to live in Eureka. So we really want you to come onto the silk. So that's why we do targeted recruitment, along with having people able to apply directly to the governor's office to be on the Silk. And we take those applications as they come in. As I think Cheryl or Peter said earlier at the beginning of the meeting, we are almost fully constituted. We have one more person moving through our appointment process. And when that's done, we'll be fully constituted. And if everybody stays on board and there's no issues that come up that make somebody need to leave the Silk early, then we won't be looking for new members until the end of 2021. But as you all know, that time is going to go really, really fast. And so over the next few months, please consider whether you would like to participate on the Silk. There's lots of ways you can get engaged before you're a member to see if this is a good fit for you. And I'm happy to walk you through that. So just reach out if you have questions or want to get more involved. We're happy to have you on board. Okay, so some of the duties and responsibilities of the Silk, I just wanted to cover kind of quickly. The Silk under Title VII, Part B, Chapter 1, Part B of the Rehabilitation Act, and it was amended under WIOA in 2014. And I can give you all of the numbers and titles. The executive order and the California Welfare Institutions Code number and all of that kind of stuff. But really, I don't think that's, going to stick in your mind today. That's not the most important thing. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy to provide it. But there's a number of laws that mandate that the Silk provides a number of duties. So, and I'm seeing a question about the sign language interpreter. Megan or Russell, did you want to address that before we move forward?
Yes. So, Eric, the ASL interpreter, we have 2 of them, and they will be switching on and off. So right now it's Cindy. But if you'd like to make it so there's less videos on your screen, you can hide the participants who don't have their cameras on. So go ahead and hover over one of those people's names and look for the 3 dots. On the top right, I hope you're seeing the interpreter, and click hide non-video participants. I'll go ahead and share those instructions in the chat as well. And then Carrie, we do have a question here for you, which was, can ILC staff join?
Thank you, Megan. I just saw that and was about to address that. So yes, ILC staff can join the Silk. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we do have restrictions on how many members can represent state agencies or independent living centers. No more than 50% can represent. So we can't have more than 9 members on the Silk because it's 18 total. So we can't have more than 9 who represent independent living centers or state agencies. So we already have 4 who are ex officios who represent state agencies, which leaves us 4 spots available for folks who represent independent living centers or state agencies. And so we're always kind of playing a juggling game as to who can join the Silk officially as an independent living center staff member. However, independent living staff members, without being formally appointed on the Silk, can still participate in our committees. And so we'll talk a little bit about that later on and how you can get involved, even if you're not a governor appointed Silk member. So hopefully
Carrie,
yes.
Sorry, this is Christina. I might have missed it, but could you also talk about whether board members fall under the ILC positions or non-ILC positions on the Silk?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Do board members of independent living centers count as independent living center positions or not?
Yes, it does. It does. So any affiliation with an independent living center counts as affiliated with a state agency or an independent living center. But again, that doesn't mean that you can't participate. There's lots of ways that you can get involved, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the presentation this morning. Okay, so again, our some of the duties that we're required to do as a SILC is, along with the directors of the independent living centers in the state, we develop and submit a state plan for independent living, also known as the SPIL. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail, and Fiona will provide some thoughts about how you can get involved and how the SPIL really impacts independent living center staff. So part of what we do at the SILC is to monitor, review, and evaluate the implementation of the SILC, of the SPIL. Sorry, all the acronyms kind of start blending together after a while. So we also coordinate activities with other organizations that represent people with disabilities. And in partnership with the DOR, we develop a resources plan for independent living services in the state. This is an attachment to the state plan for independent living and includes all of the funding for independent living services in the state that are provided by Title 7B, and outlines how those are going to be used for not only programs and services, but administration. And then part of our role is to ensure that all of our regularly scheduled meetings of the council are open to the public. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward, about Bagley-Keene and why we have to have public meetings. Okay, so again, we talked a little bit about this, but we have 4 ex officio members. We have 1 from the Department of Rehabilitation, because they are known as our designated state entity, also referred to a lot as DSE. We have our Department of Social Services, our Department of Developmental Services, and Department of Aging. So those are all ex officio members on our SILC. They are non-voting members. They typically can serve on committees and attend monthly and full council meetings. And during council meetings, they tend to provide reports on relevant departmental items, such as Department of Aging will usually provide updates on the master plan for aging, or the ADRCs, or DOR might provide information on competitive integrative employment, that kind of stuff. So it helps us to stay connected and keep our partnerships going. Okay, and I saw a lot in the chat, so I just want to make sure I'm okay. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about who is the IL network, because sometimes that can be confusing for people. And the state plan for independent living, okay, it looks like they're still having some difficulties with the ASL interpretation. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Okay.
I think we're good. I'm working with Eric in the chat.
Okay. So the state plan for independent living, or the SPIL, defines what the IL network is. And the state plan for independent living at this point defines the independent living network as the State Independent Living Council, or SILC, the designated state entity, which again, in our case in California, is the California Department of Rehabilitation, the 28 independent living centers, and CFILC. So CFILC is included because A, they're a great partner, but B, because they are our systems change contractor. And I know that you heard a lot about systems change yesterday. So we'll talk a little bit about it from the SILC perspective later on, but that's part of why they're included. They are also the state's AT contractor. And so obviously they have a lot to say in regards to that. And so they're included in our network. Other organizations and agencies serving people with disabilities throughout the state are also part of the network. Some examples might be the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, or the California Committee on the Employment of People with Disabilities. I mean, there's so many of these organizations out there, right, serving people with disabilities. There's Traumatic Brain Injury Advisory Council, the Assistive Technology Advisory Council. I mean, we could just spend all day listing all of these organizations, but I'm not going to bore you with that. So, so those are also members of our network. We try to have as many people at the table as possible. And then one of our most important IL network participant stakeholders. Those are the most important. These are people who themselves experience disabilities, family members of people who experience disabilities, employers. I mean, just really anybody who wants to get involved. The Silk really values the opinions of stakeholders and encourages them to get involved through providing comments or advocacy if they're unable to be appointed to the Silk, or those who are working in the network but who aren't a Silk member. You're still a member of the network. So does anybody have questions about who is the network or what the network is? When we talk about the IL network, we really kind of mean everybody. Okay. So I provided you with some materials on the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. It's a PDF document. It's very long. There's probably no reason you would need to read that entire act unless you were particularly interested in law. I'm going to summarize it for you a little bit here because really everything that we do at the Silk is guided by Bagley-Keene. So Bagley-Keene implements a provision of the California Constitution, which declares that meetings of public bodies and the writings of public officials and agencies are going to be open to public scrutiny. The act really is about facilitating transparency and making sure that citizens have the right to participate in government. And there's a great quote from the act that I'm going to read to you. The act affirms, quote, "The people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people, in delegating authority, do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments they have created," close quote. So this, I thought, is always really interesting because doesn't that kind of sound like the IL philosophy that we talked about a little bit earlier, that the state of California wants to make sure that our citizens are involved in the decisions and have a place in those decisions. And so that's why all of the work that we do at the Silk is part of open meetings. So what's considered a meeting at the Silk? So for the Silk, if there's 2 or more members talking about Silk business, that's a public meeting. So we can't do lots of emails back and forth to discuss issues. That would be considered a serial meeting. And it would need to be noticed and posted to our website. And our requirements say that we post all of our materials for meetings at least 10 days in advance of our meetings to our website, that all of our materials are accessible and that our meetings are accessible to people. The Bagley-Keene Act also requires that the Silk make when Silk business is being discussed, that the Silk make a public meeting location available so that people can come and attend the meeting. Now, in the world of COVID-19, things have changed a little bit, and the governor put an executive order out which temporarily makes it so there are some exceptions to Bagley-Keene. Those exceptions aren't about whether or not 2 people constitute a meeting. That's all still the same. What's changed is the public meeting location. And this has allowed the Silk to do a lot of our work online and through Zoom, and to allow our members to engage in ways that they haven't before. And so the Silk has written a letter to the governor asking that post-COVID that we continue with these exceptions to Bagley-Keene to allow folks to engage, because we know that sometimes just getting to a public meeting location is enough to prevent a person from participating. And we really need those voices at the table. So Alyssa asked, this is more strict than the Brown Act. Yes, it is more strict than the Brown Act. What subjects constitute meeting topics? Anything that is silk business. So if staff and I are, talking back and forth about administrative stuff, that's okay. But we can't be talking about making decisions. We can't, I can't email to Peter and Fiona and Christina Mills at CFILC and say, hey, we have all of this funding. What do you want to do with it? That would be silk business that needs to be discussed by the entire council. And so, those are the kinds of things that can't be discussed. What can be discussed is like, are you available for a meeting on this date? We can do emails back and forth about that. But primarily it's way more strict than the Brown Act, and primarily everything that we do is subject to Bagley-Keene. So all of our committee meetings, all of our subcommittee meetings, and our full council meetings. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about advocacy and lobbying rules. Because the SILC primarily receives funding from our federal government, and we are a state agency, members and staff are prohibited from taking part in lobbying activities. And again, this is part of what makes the California SILC a little bit different than SILCs across the country, because a lot of SILCs are nonprofit organizations, and so they can use their unrestricted funds to do some lobbying, whereas in California, we are primarily federally funded, so we don't have unrestricted funds that we can use for lobbying. So we at the SILC are unable to do that. So lobbying is defined as a person trying to influence legislation. Influence legislation, an office or employee of any agency, a member of legislature or Congress, or an officer or employee in connection with a grant award, a contract, a loan, or cooperative agreement. So this is really important for the SILC because, we really have to be careful about how we conduct our advocacy. I like to think about it as like we can provide education, we can provide information, but we can't make any asks. If it has an ask, that's usually lobbying. And so, that's an easy way to kind of remember it. Although, of course, there's nuances to all of it, right? How you can make an ask without actually making an ask. And so we try to do our education in a way where we're, on the verge of lobbying, but not technically lobbying. So members are able to engage with government officials on advocacy. They can, they can provide technical assistance. They can provide facts about issues. They can provide non-partisan information about relevant issues. So that's really important. It would be considered lobbying if a member were to ask their representative to support or introduce legislation, for example, or if they went to the governor, for example, and said, hey, independent living really needs more funding, that would be considered lobbying. We can educate and inform. We also need to comply with conflict of interest codes at the SILC. Conflict of interest is defined as any member of the council who has real or perceived financial interest in any issue. They need to disclose that, and if required, disqualify themselves from voting on certain issues. All members are required to fill out that Form 700, which is a state form that asks you to identify what your financial interests are and if you have any conflicts of interest. And the Silk has a full-time legislative specialist that can kind of help guide members and to provide some more information about all of this. And I see lots of questions, so I want to make sure I'm getting to them.
And Carrie, Christine also has her hand up.
Okay, Christine, go for it.
So I'm not really able to use the chat. So I'm wondering that letter that you were speaking about, has that gone to the governor yet, or is that in the process of going to the governor?
We sent a letter. Cheryl can probably tell me when, but I believe it was in May or June of this year, kind of, post COVID and when all of that happened. And once we saw how important it was, as we went through, we saw how much more engaged members were able to be when they were participating from a location that they were comfortable in. And so that's what's kind of sparked us to write the letter to the governor. And I know that other organizations have also been writing letters regarding Bagley, Keene, and Brown and trying to get those acts, the flexibility that has been offered during the pandemic to continue post-pandemic.
Any idea when those will be responded to?
No, I don't have any idea.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So when telling facts, can that be an ask? Alyssa asks. So as long as you are just telling the facts and you're doing it in a nonpartisan way and you're not saying, and so we want you to XYZ, then you're good. So if you were saying, for example, the independent living centers serve, 5 jillion people a year. The independent living centers have a waiting list of 4 million people. If you're telling those kinds of facts, then that's not an ask. That's providing information and kind of letting them come to their own conclusions. And Christina Mills says that if you're not sure what lobbying includes, they have an archived presentation on lobbying and systems change advocacy on the Do Network website. I've used that myself, and I strongly encourage you all to check it out if you haven't anything. Saying something that needs to be done as it is required by law. So Alyssa, maybe you can expand on your question a little bit.
Yeah, this was what I was trying to allude to. I was having a hard time putting it in words. I have spoken at a board before, and stated that something was required by law, and therefore it should be instated as it is, required by law. Is that an ask? Is that lobbying? Because you are telling someone to do something, but it is also like an aspect of government that is required, and it is not currently in operation, which is illegal.
So yes and no is the answer, which is not complex at all. So yes, it would be lobbying if you made an ask, if you said, this is required, and so you need to do this. But it would be perfectly okay to provide a fact sheet and say, this is the law. And then to
just stop there.
And stop there. But your other facts can kind of support it, right? And what you want it to do is to lead the person to, at the end of reading your little fact sheet, is to go, well, if that's the law and all of this stuff is true, then obviously we should be, complying or doing whatever. But yeah, it is touchy because you can't make an ask. You just have to kind of lead them to making these discoveries on their own, which is part of why it's important to present your information
thoroughly.
Yeah.
And this is Christine. I just want to add exactly, Carrie, you said it so well, but Alyssa, when you said, and therefore you should, that was the lobbying piece right there.
Right.
So the should. And then I also want to make it really, really clear as possible, because this comes up quite a bit, and over time, things have changed so much in my 20 years in IL. It was quite a while, I'd say about a decade ago, it wasn't as hard to do lobbying as it has become now. We are watched with a very fine tooth comb to make sure that we are following the rules. And quite honestly and frankly, when I first started in this field, that wasn't really the case. And so, for us at CFILC, you will see us doing lobbying sometimes because we do get general funds specifically to do lobbying. So like myself, Russell, Megan, and I think one of my other staff, we all have about between 10 to 5% of our paycheck is basically from general fund that allows us to do some lobbying. And that can be similar for those of you that have general fund too, but it's based on how your director and board.
We have 1%.
Okay, so you're familiar with it. I just think it's really important to know because it's not something that's consistent for all of us. Some of us don't work for nonprofits that have the luxury of having a general fund or what we call non-discretionary funds available. So it's really important to know that. And just as one of the big changes that happened to CFILC is we used to collect our membership dollars, which was like our funding to do all of our lobbying. And then Department of Rehab requested from us to change our membership forms so that now when we ask members if they'd like to be a member of CFILC, they have to tell us how much of their funding is coming from general fund versus how much of their money is coming from government dollars. We can only use the money that comes from them that are general fund dollars. So that means a lot of my fundraising and responsibility as executive director is finding other non-discretionary funds to be able to do the lobbying that we have to do because not enough centers have the amount of money that we need to do the lobbying that CFILC does.
And this is Megan. Eric has his hand up with a question.
Great. Eric? Eric, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, you were saying we can't lobby, but what about if we need to share legislation or so how can we talk to legislators? How can we make them change to help us out and really protect our civil rights or our IL rights? You're saying that we have to be very careful, and I understand that. And we can't use federal money or state money. So, but how can we educate, but how can we also make change if we're blocked from doing the lobbying? I mean, do you think, how are we able to do this and express our concerns?
It's a really good question that has a lot packed into it. So I'm going to try to get to all of it. So I want to be very clear when I say we can't lobby, I'm talking about the Silk. Now, independent living centers, as Christina just described, or CFILC may have non-restrictive funds that do allow you to do some lobbying. So you will need to check with your director to make sure, that what activities you're doing and where they fall so that you're not breaking any rules. For those organizations that have no unrestricted fund like the Silk and our state agencies, and we cannot participate in lobbying, Silk staff can't do any lobbying and Silk members can't do lobbying. But again, we can educate. And we can educate the community and individuals in the community who can lobby. So it's a lot about spreading the word, getting the word out there to people about how they can impact change, usually through letters, through attending hearings, through attending council meetings and making your voice heard. That's how we impact change. Again, the fact sheets are really helpful to legislators. Brief meetings with them, 5-10 minutes, because they don't have a lot of time. And a one-page fact sheet that just kind of lays out, here's the facts about this situation. And again, trying to get to the gist of your ask without technically making an ask. So I know that's real kind of confusing, but I'm hoping that that answers your question, Eric.
Just
If
information.
not, please let me know.
Just sharing information
This is Cheryl Kasai from the Silk.
about
I
it.
just want to make a
Them a chance
really,
to think about a little bit more deep, maybe to change their policy by providing that fact sheet. We're not saying we want them to do this, but here's the evidence. Now you come to your own conclusion, basically,
Yeah,
so that they are aware of what's going on.
yeah. Cheryl?
hi, this is Cheryl Kasai from the Silk. I just want to make a really quick comment about educating versus lobbying. I mean, lobbying is really asking, making an ask to someone who has influence on an outcome. So legislators and so on and so forth. But when you talk about educating, it's not just saying, oh, this is the independent living philosophy. I mean, all that background is really good. But I think one of the things that's really important when we talk about education is the impact. And I write letters to legislators all the time, write letters to the governor. And I don't specifically say, we want X amount of dollars, or, we want you to vote in this manner. But one of the main body of the letters that I write have to do with how does this bill or how does this action impact the disability community? So I put numbers out there to say this, if this bill passes, this is the impact to our community. And I specifically outline how our community is affected. So I think that's an important point about education and helping people that are not in the disability community to understand how this affects our community, and especially in a negative way.
Right.
So I think that's one of the most important pieces about education.
It's a really
This
good
is
point.
Christina. I just want to quickly add, and I know we have a time check coming. You guys, the reason why the Silk and the Department of Rehabilitation has put community organizing and systems change into your grants is because another really, really crucial, like probably the most important part or equally important to data is the personal stories. So the whole reason why community organizing is a big piece of the work that we're all supposed to be doing as systems change advocates is community organizing to get the stories from the consumers and the community members that we work with. That is so crucial and so important. That's who we call on to testify or to write those letters or to make those phone calls. Folks that you've organized and identify as good storytellers on why, let's just take as an example, long-term services and supports needs to be expanded to people with disabilities that work. We want people to be able to tell their story on that, and we depend on you guys to be able to find those people to tell those stories.
Mm-hmm. So Russell,
Thanks.
I know that you probably want to take a break. I see one more question if we can get to Keith's question and then maybe take a break.
I do. And whenever after we hear Keith's question, I also would like to make a quick comment to kind of close out this conversation. And maybe whenever we come back, we can move on. But
Perfect.
I've got kind of a concluding thought, I think, that might help tie some of these threads. So.
Awesome. So Keith,
okay, I'll make it really quick. Thank you, Christine. You're right. A lot has changed over the last 20 years. So I guess my question is, can you lobby on your own time? So in other words, if you're off the clock, can you lobby?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. As an individual, you can lobby. So the difference is if you walked into the governor's office and you said, I'm Carrie England and I'm a Silk member, then that would be not okay because you're representing the Silk. But if you said, I'm Carrie England and I'm a constituent in Sacramento, then yeah, you can make asks.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, Russell.
Thanks.
Off to you.
Thank you. So to kind of connect that, thank you, Keith. That was a really well-timed question. And as for those of you that are not able to access the chat, the Do Network actually has 2 webinars that are really helpful that explain the restrictions and policies regarding use of federal money and lobbying, and also the specific California-related rules around lobbying for those who do have additional flexibility. So I highly recommend that folks go to the website on our the training section of our disabilityorganizing.net website and access those trainings. They're very well done, and I look forward to hopefully updating them soon again. And just wanted to say that I know that we have a mixture of folks here on this at our summit, some of whom are not directly attached to an organization. And as individuals, as just stated, you have immense freedom to lobby, to conduct, organizing activities as you see fit. So you're kind of in a special place, although we also understand that it can be very difficult to do as an individual. So we welcome you to the DO Network. I look forward to engaging more people who would like to do the stronger advocacy that does absolutely need to occur, and also understand that we come to this as a network with a variety of backgrounds, and some independent living centers, most actually, are held to the same high standard that the Silk is.
All right, so welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the staff, the council, and the committees, and then we're going to go into more detail about our state plan for independent living and funding, and do a close-up view of some of the projects that are in our state plan for independent living, and then most importantly, talk about how that state plan really impacts the work that you're doing in the network. And then we'll do a quick website tour, and then the rest of our presentation will be dedicated to answering any questions that you have. So feel free to interrupt as we go through, to ask your questions as they come up, but also know that you will have the opportunity at the end to ask questions on any of the topics we covered or anything that we didn't cover that you want to know more about. Okay. So I wanted to talk again a little bit about the Silk and the composition of the Silk. And I know it feels like I've just gone over this so many times, but it's so important that the Silk is a state agency composed of 18 members who are appointed by the governor. Again, 14 of those are voting members and 4 are non-voting members. So I provided in the materials that we sent a document that's titled Overview of Silk Meetings. And I'm just going to refer to this, but you don't need to pull it up now or anything. It's more for your reference after the meeting is over and you're thinking back to like, what did she say? So I wanted to talk a little bit about the full council. The full council, again, members serve up to 3-year terms, so they can serve up to 6 years on the Silk. The council meets approximately 4 times a year. This changes annually depending on the funding that we have available, because typically we do pay for our members to attend, also for their personal assistance, for a small per diem, and of course for their transportation and lodging while they're attending meetings. Our full council meetings tend to be 2-day meetings, full day meetings. But with the pandemic and COVID-19, we've had to change things a little bit. And so this year we are able to plan for 4 full council meetings because we're anticipating that they will all be virtual. So right now the Silk is doing all of its meetings virtually, and will continue to do so until a vaccine is available for COVID-19 for the majority of the public. Members and members of the public can participate by phone when we are having our in-person meetings. And right now we're utilizing the Zoom platform to do our meetings. So you're absolutely able to participate in any of the meetings that I'm talking about today. And at the end of our presentation, Cheryl Kasai is going to walk us through our website, and she will show you where you can find out when the meetings are and where they're posted and where the agendas are and all of that kind of stuff. So we have, let's see, we have 4 committees and work groups. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those. So we have our full Silk Council meeting, which is the 18 members. And then we have various subcommittees, which meet on a monthly basis. Again, all of these meetings are public meetings, so they have to be publicly noticed at least 10 days in advance because of Bagley-Keene. So we have an executive committee of the Silk, which meets on the 4th Monday of each month. The executive committee is made up of the Silk chair, the vice chair, and the chair of all of the other committees. The executive committee elects their chair and vice chair by a majority of the council vote, and they can serve up to 2 single-year terms as chair or vice chair. The executive committee has the authority to act on behalf of the full council in between meetings. So if something comes up, and we don't have time to convene the entire council, again, we tend to meet quarterly, then the executive committee can take action and then let the full committee know what actions have been taken. An example might be an approval of changes to the Silk policies and procedures that typically would be voted on by the entire committee, but we need to add something quickly, and so the executive committee could vote on that. To let us know. It would usually first be discussed and approved by our governance committee and then go to the executive committee and then to the full council. So you can see there's some shortcuts that we can take if we have to, although we really try at the Silk to make sure that all of our decisions are transparent and that we bring everything to the full council when possible. The executive committee can direct other committees by suggesting agenda items. It also reviews our annual budget and makes recommendations as needed and oversees my work as the executive director. So although I'm the executive director, I still answer to the Silk Council, which I find to be very helpful in guiding me along the way of what direction this organization wants to be going. Our governance committee meets on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. They are primarily responsible for reviewing Silk policies and procedures, recruiting and training new council members, and making recommendations for our Silk ILC member partnerships. This is a kind of pseudo program that we initiated a few years back where we pair our Silk members with Independent Living Center directors so that Silk members can learn about the great work that the Independent Living Centers are doing, but also so that they have a direct connection to the ILCs and can learn about any kinds of issues that they might be facing or directions that they want the Silk to take. It's a back and forth conduit. It's not just one way. So we really hope that they learn from each other through the process. We encourage them to get together with their Independent Living Center director, once a month or whatever, coffee, COVID has really changed things and how we are able to do it. But pre-COVID, what we were doing was asking that let me pause for a moment. What we were asking is that members be paired with ILC executive directors who were near to them so that they could go and visit them in person, perhaps go get coffee together, kind of develop that relationship. But with COVID-19, of course, not all of those in-person meetings are available. So people are meeting by phone, they're meeting on Zoom whenever possible to just kind of connect and see what's happening. So our governance committee really is responsible for that. And again, they meet on the third Wednesday of the month. Now our spill committee meets again monthly. They meet on the third Monday of each month. And their role is to monitor the progress of the current spill, to develop the spill, and report on the status of its goals and objectives. So again, we'll get into all things spill in just a little while, but you'll see that it is a robust document. I think I'm guessing because it's been a while since I looked at it, but I think it's like 80 or 90 pages long. It's again, a robust document that has the goals. It outlines our goals, our objectives, how we're going to get there, our timelines. It outlines our funding. It defines who's in the network. I mean, it really is just a document of guidance for the Silk and for the entire network. So the spill committee, their job is to kind of monitor that, evaluate what worked in the last spill and what should continue in our next spill. The spill is created every 3 years. I don't know if I said that before. It's created every 3 years. And although we are in the process of creating our new spill, we're still doing evaluation on our last spill. So that was 2017 through 2019. So I'll talk a little bit more about the spill and evaluation in a little while. Our Communications and Collaborations Committee meets on the second Friday of each month, and their role really is to identify and monitor current legislative items. And our legislative specialist, Cheryl Kasai, attends that meeting on a regular basis and helps the committee to draft letters to legislators and other decision makers, again, to educate and promote IL philosophy and to provide education on issues which we think that they might not know that much about and that they should, and to monitor communication avenues to increase outreach and make sure that people across the state have access to information. So we do a lot of publications like our Silk newsletter, which comes out monthly, and we do a lot of social media posts. Of course, you can feel free to join us there, and we encourage you to, and to sign up for our newsletters. You can do so right on the website, or you can just send any one of us an email and we will add you to our newsletter distribution list. Okay, and then finally we have spill work groups. Those the meeting dates on those vary. Right now we don't have any spill work groups up and running, but we probably will be initiating them again soon in 2021. The spill work groups are groups that are dedicated towards specific programs in the spill to help to develop that program. So for example, the most recent work groups that we had were regarding systems change, funding formula, transportation and housing, and there was a data work group. And so those groups worked on elements that ended up going into our state plan for independent living. So those members are open to the public, or those meetings are open to the public. The executive director or the Silk chair can convene work groups at any time. And so as we're moving through the next calendar year, we will be sure to send you any opportunities for you to participate in any of these meetings. But again, at the end of our presentation, we'll do kind of a website walkthrough and we'll show you where to find out where those meetings are. Again, because all of our meetings are public meetings, they're always on the website at least 10 days in advance. If they're not, for some reason, if we have a glitch and it doesn't get posted, then we have to cancel the meeting. Okay, any questions on any of the committee stuff before I move on? I'm going to check the chat real quick. Okay. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for more information about our state plan on independent living. I'm going to turn it over to Fiona Henze who is a former Silk member and the former chair of our Spill Committee, to talk to you a little bit more about it.
All right. Thank you, Carrie. And you covered several parts already in what's in this section. So thank you for that. As Carrie mentioned, I led the spill writing process as the former spill chair, and in full disclosure, I served my 6 years, so I had to go. I didn't necessarily want to leave, but I never want to leave Carrie and Cheryl. So yeah, so I'm gonna go into more detail, a little bit more detail about the spill. And we'll delve more into exactly what's in the current spill that we're operating under in further sections of this presentation. But in this particular section, I'm going to try to keep it pretty general because it can get pretty technical. So why do we make in addition to it being sort of the guiding document of independent living in the work we do, why do we make such a big deal about the spill? Is, well, it's required by law. So in order to receive federal funds, each state has to have in operation a state plan for independent living. And the Silk is responsible for creating ours, and we do that in collaboration with you all heard this morning about the term that we use, the IL network, where we, as a reminder, that includes Department of Rehabilitation as our designated state entity, the ILCs, ILC staff, CFILC, stakeholders, and other partners. So what is the spill? The spill, it essentially outlines the needs of the IL network. There's that term again. IL network, and we set goals. We set goals to meet those needs. So those goals are also in the spill. We determine those goals with a fairly robust needs assessment, which we'll get into a little bit later, I'm sure. We sometimes survey the community. We undertook a fairly extensive survey last year. We sometimes do focus groups, and we really try to make sure we get as diverse a cross section. And then once we have the needs of the community identified, we sort of convert those into goals to meet those needs, right? So, and that was the task of each spill work group that Carrie just mentioned. So we saw that, for example, system change and community organizing was a need that the community identified. So we created the system change work group. Same for deinstitutionalization. So we really try to involve the community as much as possible in the development of this document. And we develop a new spill every 3 years because we know that the needs of the community change and evolve. So you might hear the term a spill cycle. What that means is basically a 3-year period in which a given spill is operational. So, for example, the current spill we are running under is a 2020-2022 spill. So that means in 2022, another spill is due, although we really start the process of developing the spill sooner than you would think after one spill is already submitted. So then, and again, we really do value community input in all of this development. So then once we have those goals and objectives developed, who signs on to this bill? So we do have some requirements by law. In order for this bill to be sort of valid, it has to be signed off by a few different folks. So that would be the chair of the Silk. So whoever the chair is, in this case, Peter, would sign off on this bill. The Department of Rehabilitation, as again, our designated state entity. So we have Director Xavier who signs off on this bill. And then lastly, the ILC, we're required to have a majority of the ILC directors sign off. So given that we have 28 directors, we need at least 15 to sign off. We try to get more. We always, in the words of my predecessor spill chair, we always strive for 100%. So the spill is really worked on by a total of 49 individuals, sometimes often more, because we value really public input. The 18 Silk members and the 28 ILC directors. So I think for and then after the spill is signed off on, our role as a Silk is really and particularly the spill committee who lead this work, is to monitor and evaluate the outcomes of the goals that we set, the outcomes of the goals and objectives that we set in the spill. So we have, to help us do that, we have DLR come and do quarterly reports. Well, they come to our committee monthly to every meeting, but they also come to the full council yearly, quarterly rather. So they come to our full council meetings and give us a report on this progress. And then we also produce evaluation of the spill at the end of, I believe it's each year, but definitely at the end of year 2, we produce an evaluation. So I think that's it for sort of the general overview. Are there questions? And if not, I'll pass it back to Carrie for funding. But are there any questions in the chat? Let me see.
Yeah, no, I don't see any in the chat right now.
All right. Thank you. I'll pass it back to Carrie for funding.
Thanks so much, Fiona. And we will go into much more detail about the spill in a little while and about our spill public comment period that we have going on, etc. So I just wanted to touch on the fact Fiona mentioned that we had DOR come to report out on spill activities. CFILC also comes and does a report out to us regarding the systems change grant. Let's see. So I wanted to talk a little bit about funding, and this stuff can get really complicated really quick if you're not involved in it. And so I'm going to keep it very high level. And all of this information is in our state plan. So you can easily find it. So the Silk's federal funding is administered through the Administration on Community Living, or ACL, as you will hear it referred to. We have a designated state entity, which you've heard about a little bit today, the DSC, which in our case is Department of Rehabilitation. And that is the agency on behalf of the state that receives and accounts for the funding.
Can I ask to interrupt? What was the ACL? I missed that, and I apologize for interrupting you.
No, absolutely. The Administration for Community Living. Okay, so in California, the Department of Rehabilitation receives the federal funds from ACL and accounts for them and disperses them throughout the network. And so that's why oftentimes you think about DOR being the one in control of the money, but do understand that the money actually is designated in the state plan for independent living, and DOR just plays a role in collecting it and dispersing it. And so that's why they're the ones who are in control of the grants, such as systems change, transition, et cetera. We'll talk about a little bit going forward. So those are called Part B funds. They're actually Title VII Subchapter B funds, but we lovingly refer to them as Part B funds in our network, and you'll probably hear about them a lot. The Silk, we operate, because we are a state agency, we have an interagency agreement. So like collaborative agreement with the Department of Rehab, where they administer the funds to the Silk as well as to the independent living centers. The Silk is, so the total pot of Part B dollars is awarded to the state. The Silk is eligible to receive up to 30% of those Part B funds. So we can't receive more than that unless in our state plan for independent living, we justify why we would need more than the 30%. In our case in California right now, we don't utilize more than 30%. So you will not see that. We use just under 30%. So the DSC, or the Department of Rehabilitation, is eligible to get 5% of the Part B funds. So they're allowed to kind of take 5% of those funds in order to administer the program. So that helps pay for their staffing to run these grants that we're talking about and to distribute the money to the Silk and to the centers. So that leaves up to 65% of the Part B funds available for what we call spill projects. These spill projects are projects that are outlined in the state plan for independent living to utilize that extra 65%. So the IL network collaboratively decides on how that money is going to be spent for each 3-year spill period. In our current spill, we have allocated dollars for a number of projects for the Silk, for the DSC administration, for the systems change grant, the deinstitutionalized transition grant, and what we call the tier funding allocation. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about those programs in detail, because I'm sure that there's some questions there. But I wanted to talk just real briefly about our state plan and the comment period that I touched on a moment ago. So again, every 3 years, we submit a new state plan for independent living to the ACL, or Administration on Community Living. That's due each year at the end of June. So this year we submitted our spill, and we received some feedback from the ACL. In fact, most of the silks in the country did because they created a new tool this year. And so most of the silks in the country got some feedback that they needed to add a couple of things to their state plans. They gave us a conditional approval through the end of December and asked us to provide some clarity or more information. The changes that we needed to make were not significant in that they are not material, in that they didn't change our objectives. It didn't change our funding. It didn't change our outcomes, anything like that. They were really kind of technical things. For example, one of the items was that our goals didn't have a scope of service on them. So we went through and we added the term statewide to each goal, and that addressed that issue. So with your materials today, I have provided you a handout which identifies how you can make comments on the spill revision. We are currently in our public comment period. Because this wasn't material changes, we didn't need to do the whole hearing and all of that. Let me back up a little bit. Usually when we do our state plan for independent living, we involve the public and we invite them to participate in what we call public hearings, where members of the public and the IL community can make comments on the state plan for independent living. And then we take all of that, all of those comments and feedback and bring it back to the spill committee and the executive committee and kind of incorporate that into our spill document. Because we didn't have any what we call material changes, they were all just kind of like technical clarifications. We didn't feel that we needed to have a full spill hearing, but because again, we value transparency at the Silk and we want the public and the IL network to be involved, we did put this document out for a 30-day public comment period in which we're taking comments on the revisions that we made. So with your materials today, I've provided you with the full document of the spill that we submitted, as well as a document which outlines those changes that we are proposing to make to the spill to add that clarification that ACL is requesting. Our public comment period ends on December 3rd. So you are welcome to submit public comments either by email or there's a phone line that you can call. And again, the methods in which you can contact the Silk are on that sheet. And of course, you can just reach right out to any of us if you have questions. We will then take all of the feedback that we receive, finalize the spill, and submit it by the end of December. The reason we need to do this is because without a spill, then funding stops to the state, and we want to make sure that funding continues through the state. Okay, let me just check.
I noticed that we have Eric has his hand up.
Okay, Eric.
Actually, yes. Hi, I do have my hand up. I have a question about the funding for VR or DOR. So they are in control of the money. Do they get money from the ACL? Is that correct? But then the ACL, that's at the federal level, right? Do you mind explaining that a little bit more?
Sure.
And you were also saying you were surprised that DOR, they have power over the money and how it's allocated. Is that correct in terms of funding?
No, that is not correct.
Okay.
Okay, so the state plan for independent living allocates funds for the state of California. So the money comes from the ACL and it's administered by the DOR. The DOR does not make decisions about how the money is being spent. The state plan for independent living decides that. So the entire network makes that decision. The DOR is eligible to retain 5% of the funds so that they can pay for their staffing. And the Silk can take 30% for our staffing and programs, which leaves about 65% remaining. Does that clear it up?
Yes. Yes, very clear.
Yeah, it's a great question and it can get very confusing. Any other
Yeah,
questions?
Yeah, so is there some type of document or guide as to how it's budgeted? So, we know how it's allotted. So maybe we can show the mapping process just to help understand, what the budget is and how the funds are being used, just to help me understand a little bit more clearly.
Absolutely. In the State Plan for Independent Living document, it outlines the resource plan, which shows exactly how the funds are distributed through the network. So it'll show you how much goes to each of the spill projects, how much the Department of Rehab takes. They also provide a match. So it shows that, it shows the Silk budget. So you'll be able to get a full picture of it in the state plan.
Okay.
Great. And I will post.
So is there a website where you can direct me to find that?
Absolutely. At the end of our presentation, we're going to walk you through the Silk website and I will show you exactly where to find it there. But it was also sent out with your materials today. So you should all already have a copy of the spill.
Okay. Alrighty.
Okay. So again, we could spend like all day talking about the spill goals. And I could really talk about this forever, but I don't want you to lose interest. And I feel like I'm doing a lot of the talking. I want to give you the opportunity to do some talking too. But this is kind of an important part for understanding how you fit into the state plan for independent living. So I want to talk about 3 projects that particularly impact the work of the independent living centers. Although, of course, the entire state plan impacts your work, right? And Fiona is going to talk a little bit more about that following this. But so with your materials, I provided you a document. Again, you don't need to pull it up now. It's more just for your reference, which I believe it's called Spill Projects is what I titled it. And it really just talks about those 3 projects that we have identified in the state plan for independent living to utilize that remaining 65% of the Part B funds that we have. So the one that you're probably most familiar with and that I will talk about in a little bit of detail is the Systems Change Grant Network Hub. And I want to say that kind of like the IL network, this concept can get confusing because there's lots of different arms of it, right? So the spill allocates $375,000 a year for of the Title 7B funds for Systems Change Network Hub grant. The grant is administered by the Department of Rehabilitation. They put out a request for applications, which outlines everything that they want to see in the grant. Now, that request for applications doesn't come from the DOR. That request from applications is developed jointly by the DOR and the Silk. And that's why we had a subcommittee that was dedicated toward systems change so that we could identify what the network wanted to include in that grant. And so then the DOR puts out a request for applications, which is a process for grant solicitation, and they receive applications. And in this case, California Foundation for Independent Living Centers won the grant. So what I'm going to be talking about is the role that the Systems Change Grant Hub would have, no matter who the recipient of the grant would be, as is identified by the Silk. So what I'm trying to say is that the Silk provided some really general guidelines about what we wanted to see the Systems Change Network grant accomplish. And then each potential grantee has to answer to those grant objectives and say exactly how it is that they're going to accomplish those grant objectives. So what I'm going to talk about is real general, but how CFILC accomplishes each of those items is going to vary. And that's probably what the majority of the conversation that you had yesterday was what's in the grant, what is it composed of, what are the different aspects of it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because I know that you've already had a pretty in-depth conversation about the systems change grant. But from the Silk's perspective, the Network Hub's primary focus is to be on statewide issues, particularly issues as they are addressed throughout the state that would impact everybody, everybody with a disability throughout the state. The Network Hub is expected to provide program supports and services in support of the current spill, the mission, the goals, and the objectives in the spill. So in our current spill, what we've said is that we want the Network Hub to do some education and training, telling the network what's going on that with issues that might impact disability rights or the ability to live independently. We've asked the grantee to provide technical assistance on how to coordinate statewide activities, we've asked them to provide guidance to advocates to be consistent with laws. So the Silk doesn't say how they're supposed to do this. We just say, do this. And then it's up to each grantee to figure out how they're going to do it. We've been very lucky that CFILC has been our systems change network contractor for some time and has some real feet on the ground in this area. And so although this is a 3-year grant, we've been lucky to have some continuity with the program over the years. Other things that we ask them to do is, again, doing network coordination, making sure that you're all connected, that you all know what's going on with each other, and providing infrastructure and coordination, which allows them to put on conference calls and trainings and webinars and activities such as the Disability Capital Action Day and all of those fun events. Community organizing to make concrete system changes is what we've really asked them to focus on. And then, of course, they do outreach and recruiting. We've asked them to do leadership development. We've really asked the grantee to do a lot under this grant. And that's where you all come in, right? Is helping them to achieve those goals. Okay, let me check. Okay, and so Christina put in the chat an example of kind of the organizing that they're doing is getting disability into the master plan on aging. That has been so important to make sure that disability has not been forgotten and that it's not just a secondary item, that it's really at the forefront. And CF has been instrumental in doing so. And then again, Christina has mentioned increasing the voting of people with disabilities. They did a really aggressive get out the vote campaign and made sure that everybody had the information that they needed to participate in the voting process. So there's lots of different ways that CF has taken these goals that we've identified at the Silk and made that become a reality for our grant. Okay, so I want to move on to our transition grant, which is another spill project. Again, this is part of that 65% of the Title VII-B funds that come to the state. In the state plan for independent living, we have allocated $400,000 for deinstitutionalized transition and diversion. So the independent living centers work with the DOR to secure funding for consumers to move from a restrictive setting to a less restrictive setting, or for diversion services, which are to keep people out of institutions or prevent them from going to a more restrictive setting, which would not be of their choice, and to help transition youth from maybe a parent's home or an institution or a foster home situation to a less restrictive setting, maybe a shared housing or a dorm room or a house in a community setting. So those are the three aspects under our transition grant that we serve. Again, the work is done by the independent living centers. They submit requests to the DOR, and then the DOR gets them the funds that they need to provide the services to the consumers. And then on a monthly basis, those numbers are reported back to the SILC. And that's one of the ways that we're able to keep track of how well the program's working or not working, and whether we need to make changes to broaden the scope or to reduce the scope or add additional funds, those kinds of things. Funds have limited and very specific uses under this grant, but generally they are one-time funds. Generally, it's limited to $4,500 per consumer. And the idea is that they will coordinate with the Independent Living Center, create a goal with the Independent Living Center to help them move from a situation of more restriction to a situation of less restriction. And then once they have transitioned, these funds can be used on a variety of different things. But for example, to get your utilities turned on, or those kinds of things, first month's rent, furniture, things that you would need to transition to community housing of your choice that you might not have access to. Okay, and then finally, one of the spill projects that we have identified is called tier augmentations, which can get a little bit confusing, but these grants go directly to the independent living centers to help bring equity to the network, because at one point, there have been conversations in the network about whether funding has been equitably distributed throughout the state. For the most part, the ACL makes decisions about how that funding is distributed for the big pot of money, what's called the Title 7C or Part C funds that go directly to the centers. But this pot of money that comes from ACL to our state and is administered by DOR and decided by the State Plan for Independent Living, this pot of money, we decided that the network decided that to help bring equity to the network, that they were going to allocate $940,000 from the Part B funds to the independent living centers, and the independent living centers are able to utilize that fund on anything that they would typically spend funds on to provide what is called their core services. So basically the SILC has said to the centers, we know that funding is tight. We know that it doesn't seem equitable. Here is one solution, one small way that we can try to help make things more equitable by giving you each a little pot of money, and you can spend it on whatever you can spend your normal $7C dollars on. So I know the funding part can get really like in the weeds and confusing, but I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Okay, I'm not seeing any, and I see Christina had put in the chat that core services are defined by federal law, and there are 5 of them. And then in California, we have some additional core services, and all of that is available on the ACL website under their independent living programs. But again, I am more than happy to chat with any of you after this, or in the next week or two, if you want to learn more about independent living services. I'm sure that Christina, if she has time, would also be willing to help walk you through it. but the core services are those services that every independent living center across the country is required to provide in order to get their federal funding. And if I can remember them off the top of my head, it's been a while since I was a center director, but it is information and referral, peer counseling, oh gosh, here we go. Systems change.
Advocacy, yeah.
Advocacy, peer mentoring. Did I say information?
Independent living skills training.
Independent living skills, like the most important one, right? And, housing and transportation. So there's a number of core services.
Actually, housing and transportation aren't on their own. They would be under systemic change.
Or independent living services, depending on how you approach it.
Oh my gosh. I clearly need to review my core services. It's been 8 years. So I should give you a tiny bit of background. I was previously a center director in Iowa for about 8 years. And then I've also worked at the DOR, both as a counselor and as in charge of their independent living section. So I have a really broad view of all of this. And so that's why I'm happy to help with any of the information that you might need from this presentation.
Also, if there's enough interest too, we can work to assemble a training. I think it's probably maybe time to have a public training, and maybe we can partner with the Silk and work together.
Absolutely. I love partnering with CF. So anytime.
And just quickly, this is Christine. I just want to say, because this is always confused and this is helpful for public members too, while California independent living centers get funding to do assistive technology services, we are the only state in the country where assistive technology is in independent living centers. All other AT programs across the country are housed in university centers on excellence or at a nonprofit like Easter Seals, run by state government, or run by, there was one other one, now I'm gonna forget, but my point is, in California, we are so fortunate that AT is a part of independent living. Most of the other states, while they all have AT Act programs, they don't partner and they don't implement the services through independent living centers.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, I know we've been giving a lot of information verbally, and I want to maybe take a minute, if we could, to kind of give our friends that might learn visually or want a quick tour of the Silk website, because I know that there were some questions about finding some of the information and where to keep an eye.
Yeah, we will definitely be going through the website in depth in just a little while. So I would say, just stay tuned. We're going to get there relatively soon. Okay, so I want to keep us moving because we are actually kind of, I thought we would spend about 2 hours talking about all of this material, and it's such great material that of course we're stretching. So I want to give ample time for the website review and for your questions, because that's really the most important. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Fiona to talk about how the spill impacts your work.
Sure. So I'm gonna, and a lot of this portion has been stated already, but I'm just sort of gonna bring it all together, if you will, because I know that as Russell said, we've been sort of dealing with a highly technical topic, and while Carrie and I and Peter have been trying not to get technical, we sometimes can't help ourselves. So I'm going to try to bring it home for everyone here. So as you heard, as we've talked about multiple times, the spill again is a document that outlines sort of the needs and goals of the IL network. While it may seem very distant to you and like the Silken deal are on a pedestal making policies that don't affect me as a constituent or an ILC employee. I want to tell you that this bill does indeed drive your work, especially if you work at an ILC. Your center may or may not directly or indirectly receive the federal funding or Title 7B, as we've sometimes referred to it. If you are doing system change work or like a community transitions coordinator, you are already moving us towards the spill goals, and you're already sort of working on the achievement of those. So we appreciate you and everything that you do. Depending on your position, spill dollars or dollars that come to us through the spill may actually be paying your salary. So that is a direct impact that we should all also care about. I want to say that also while your priorities at your center may be outlined in the spill, your local plan is driven by your ED and your board of directors. So let's take, for example, the system change portion of this bill, which Carrie already graciously outlined. We have a systems change network, but we all have local plans, in which if you take nothing else away from this section of the presentation, I highly recommend that you ask your ED or whoever your supervisor is to have you have a look at that local plan. That local plan is driven by the goals of the spill in terms of system change and community organizing, but it's really the on the ground part of it, because each community is different, is really driven by your center, your supervisors, and your each individual ILC's board. Also, but they may ask you to focus on, for example, certain underserved communities that we might outline in the spill that are prevalent in your area. Which is another thing that the spill does, is outline underserved communities. I don't think we got to that. So I think to conclude this portion of the presentation, I think that the main takeaway is that what we've been talking about today, while it may seem really distant and not applicable to the work that we all do, it indeed actually really is a core component of what we do. As you all know, I'm also, in addition to being a former SILC member, the systems change staff for ILRC, SF. So I led the spill development, but I also implement our policy on a local level. So if you ever have any questions about how the system change part in particular, but the spill as a whole, impacts the day-to-day of work at ILCs, you can feel free to reach out to me and or Peter, who's also an excellent resource. Carrie, did you want to now go into the website tour, or have Peter and I close and take questions first?
I think I was going to ask Russell. Russell, do you want to take a 10-minute break before we do the website tour, or do you want us to power through?
Well, I'll go to the room in general and kind of get a feel. Do folks have questions that are on their mind now? Because I think this might be a good point to kind of ask some quick questions, and then maybe take a break, then do the tour. I don't know I want to know how folks are feeling. If folks feel we need a break, please indicate in chat, or feel free to go verbally too.
Reactions, if you'd like.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of ways you could respond. You can do it in chat, or you can also use the reactions down at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to give a thumbs up if you think break is good.
I'm seeing a couple.
I'm seeing in chats that there are break. Okay. So let's take, are we okay with a 10-minute break? I would really like to get through the rest of the content and make sure that we do have time for questions. All right. Welcome back, folks. I hope folks are settled back in. We'll give ourselves just 1 minute, and then Carrie has laid out a roadmap for the rest of the day. We're going to start with a tour of the website, and then Peter is going to talk about how folks can get involved in the Silk. And I think that's probably going to be of interest to the majority of folks here. I highly encourage everyone to attend meetings and kind of get a feel and flavor for how the Silk operates. All right. Cheryl, would you like to take over? Or Carrie, I'll turn it over to you. Makes more sense.
No problem. Thank you, everybody, for coming back. We will try to keep it short and light because I know this has been really information intensive and probably not how you wanted to spend your Thursday morning. So let's try to make it a little bit more fun for the next half hour. I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl Kasai, who is our legislative specialist. And I've kind of put her on the spot because I just feel like I've been talking too much. So I've asked her to do a quick tour of our website and show you where you can find things like our meeting notices. So Cheryl, I'm going to turn it to you.
Can everybody see my screen, which should have the Silk website?
Yes.
Yep.
I don't do this very often, so it's kind of a weird shop for me because I don't know what you're looking at, but you're looking at my screen. So on the website, this is our main web page, and if you look at the very top in the URL segment, it's our website is https://www.calsilk.ca.gov, which I have my pointer up here. So this is, and I highlighted it right there. And if you do Google search or other internet searches, you can always just type in the Silk, California Silk. If you put Silk, you might get the 50 or 52 other Silks across the country because there's one in each state. So put California Silk or put calsilk.ca.gov and you should get our website. So just quickly across the top menu banner, there it says we have our logo, and then it says about the Silk. And as I hover over those areas, you could see under About Silk, it says our mission, our role, statutory requirements, Silk resources, council members, and staff. A really quick way, if you don't happen to jot down the email addresses for the staff, like Carrie or myself, you can just click on the staff page and you'll see our lovely pictures and information about each of us. And then underneath each of the pictures, it says email Carrie England, email Cheryl Kasai, or our office manager is Danielle Hess. And when you click on that, it'll pull up your whatever mail browser, internet mail you have, and it'll automatically type in our email address. So we also have areas for the Silk News, and each of our monthly newsletters comes up in order. The most recent one comes up at the top. And then if you click on the title, it will go directly. We post the entire newsletter on here as well as there should be accessible links, accessible document links at the bottom of those as well. Meetings and notices is probably an area that you're going to be looking at quite a bit. All of our meetings are open to the public, and we have 4 committee meetings each month. So as I scroll down, first of all, our full council meetings are always announced at the very top. And whenever we actually schedule the dates, we'll put it up, and then we'll also post our agenda. We don't put all of the meeting documents for that on the website because it's quite a bit, but you can always contact us to get the meeting documents. We're happy to share that. So all of our work is public work. So there's nothing hidden or surprised about, what we do. So we have in order at the top of our committee meetings, we have executive committee, and it'll say the next meeting scheduled for whatever date from this time to this time. And then in parentheses, it'll list the usual meeting date. We have standing meeting dates every month for each of the committees. So the executive committee meets the 4th Monday of the month. And then we have to list our, at least through Begley Keene, at minimum, we have to post our agendas for each committee meeting 10 days prior to the meeting, okay? So typically we'll have the agenda, the meeting minutes from the last monthly meeting, and then other documents that we'll be discussing during that committee meeting, okay? Our communication and collaboration committee, and each of the committees lists the chair. Again, next meeting for this committee is going to be Friday, December 11th from 10:30 to 12. And that meets the second Friday of the month. So as you go down, you can get all of the documents now because the next meeting is not till the 11th. We have 10 days prior to that to post it. So typically the agenda won't be up until then, okay? And if you want to know about the spill, if you hover over meetings and notices, there's a webpage that says State Plan for Independent Living. And we have listed, our website was recently made totally accessible. But if you do have problems, please, we want you to let us know because we want to make those corrections as soon as possible. So we don't have a lot listed on this page, mainly because we've just changed our website. So pretty much everything that's on is fairly recent, just FYI. But if you do want previous spill information, we're very happy to share that with you. So right now, as Carrie mentioned, we are in a draft comment period for the current 2021-2023 spill. And so that is listed under spill public comment. The draft we list all of our documents in accessible Microsoft Word and also accessible Microsoft rich text format, okay? And then we also have listed right now the summary of edits. So if you don't want to go through the whole spill, which is probably about 1,000 pages, you could just go to the summary and see what has recently been edited, and that which we will submit to the Administration for Community Living by the end of December. So does anybody have any comments? That's kind of a really, really brief introduction. I encourage you, if you want to know more, we have plenty of information on our website about our regulatory requirements, our role. We have a whole listing of our council members on here. You can, our contact page, if you look at the very top on the menu bar on the far right, you can contact us by email, phone. We have toll-free number. We have fax number as well. Also snail mail. So anything else that anybody wants to add? Carrie, you want to add anything else that I might have missed?
No, thank you so much, Cheryl, for going through that. I saw that Alyssa had a question about the meetings. Alyssa, is that something you want me to answer now?
Yeah, I think it would be useful.
Okay. What's your
So
question?
I've been on the site several times trying to get into these meetings, and unless I make an appointment on my planner to come specifically within a certain time beforehand to find the agenda and to hope that the link for Zoom for the meeting is on there, it's not really that accessible. And I've also tried to join the mailing list in the hopes that I could get meetings and agendas and links emailed to me to make it a little bit more accessible. And I have not been able to achieve that.
Okay, that's good feedback, and I will make sure to add you to our mailing list. So after this meeting's over, we'll get you on our mailing list, which will primarily get you our newsletters and our like press releases and those kinds of things, and notification for our big main council meetings. The subcommittee meetings, like the spill committee, executive committee, and such, we typically send those agendas out to members of the Silk or those who request the agenda. So if you would like to be added, we can definitely add you to those. But then again, the agenda is posted, it's supposed to be posted at least 10 days in advance. Over the last 2 months or so, Silk staff and I have been working to make this more accessible of a website, and we've had a couple of glitches here and there. So that might have been why you were having difficulty, but we hope that that doesn't continue in person.
Thank you. I really appreciate that a lot. That would be very helpful for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Cheryl again. I want to just briefly mention the agendas are posted 10 days prior, and at the top of each agenda shows you, gives you information about how to access our meetings. Now, the governance committee meeting is the only committee that meets by phone. So we have the number as well as the code for that. And then the Zoom meetings, of course, many of you know, the Zoom links, they change every time you meet. So there's going to be a different Zoom link, and the correct Zoom link is always posted on the agenda 10 days prior. But please feel free to reach out to us by email if you want. You know, it's kind of difficult to try to reach out to us the day of the meeting, because all of us are, 3 of us staff the 4 meetings. So we may not be looking at our emails, just as a warning. But if you get in touch with us like the day before or a couple days before, or say, hey, I would like you to start sending me the notices, the 10-day notices before the meetings, we are more than happy to do that for you. So don't, we're not trying to hide anything. We're not trying to hide from you guys. This is for you. This is our community, and we are glad to support you guys as best as we can.
Thank you. It's just very, it's just very difficult because like all the different committees and all the different like city planning meetings and
Right.
and like and everybody has like, okay, 7 days, 10 days, 3 days, all different days for going in and checking. And I could spend like a whole day every week just checking agendas, and it is so difficult. And then like if the agenda is sent out beforehand, and then if the meeting link is sent out after the agenda, it's just ridiculous trying to keep up with everybody and all the different things that they do.
Yeah, and this is Carrie, especially with everything moving virtually. We totally get that that has become even more of an issue than it was in the past. And so we are working really hard to make sure that that our website is accessible to all and that the materials are sent out to everybody. So yeah, I would recommend, and I'm going to turn it over to Peter in just a moment to kind of close this out, and then we'll take more comments and questions if you have them. But for those of you who have not been involved with the Silk before in the past, I would recommend that you attend our full council meetings or perhaps our spill committee meetings. I think those are the two that would be the most valuable to you to start with. The governance committee, the executive committee, and the communications and collaborations committee are more involved in like the Silk processes and administration, whereas the spill committee and the Silk council meeting give you more of a broader overview and would help you to get more involved in the work of the Silk going forward. So Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of give us some closing thoughts on how folks can get involved, and then we'll take some questions.
No problem. And thank you, Carrie. I want to thank all of you who listened to all of us for this morning. I want to thank everyone who presented as well. You know, the Silk is really here for you. And kind of the goal of this presentation was to make sure that we really were able to convey how important the Systems Change Network and systems advocacy is to the Silk, how important it is. So just to kind of go over, you know, our meetings are open to the public, so feel free to participate at any time. I did want to touch on a couple of things. We do, of course, we need a reasonable accommodation to participate. Pursuant to most state agencies, we like to have those requests 5 days in advance, and if we receive them after 5 days, that's fine, but we can't always guarantee to meet the request. But reach out to us. Our staff and council are there for you. Public comments are really important. At our meetings, people can speak on each agenda item. And also we have at our meetings open time for public expression as well. Those comments, we ask folks to limit them for 3 minutes, but we want to make it as accessible as possible. So if you need a longer time to speak because of a disability-related condition or use an interpreter or communication device, please let the chair or staff know, and we will certainly accommodate. We do meet via Zoom and or teleconference. And, you know, the public can also comment on draft documents and the spill. And as was mentioned earlier, you can also, you know, provide feedback to the staff directly. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. This has really been a transformative year for the Silk, and we really strived hard, both as a council and staff team, to really make the Silk more friendly and more open and more transparent, because we really do work for the independent living programs and services and people with disabilities in our state. And that means we work for you. Just one more thing closing. If anyone does have any questions, I know we covered a lot, so feel free to reach out to us. And remember, if you want to serve on the Silk, you know, reach out to staff Carrie, Cheryl, and Danielle, or go to the governor's website. And I want to leave time for questions or a call. Oh, I did have one idea. I'm thinking we might be able to at least post our agendas on the Access Now website, so folks would have a central place to go to get the agenda. So we'll reach out to see if I want to shout Carrie, make sure that's okay. But I think there are some ways we can make our meetings even more accessible. Okay, does anyone have any questions or comments? Remember, we're here for you.
Hi, Peter. This is Carrie. I just saw a message in the chat from Lily Beth Navarro, and I wanted to comment on it. She had asked whether we could provide a job listing of the committees and dates and everything. And I wanted to let you all know that that was provided in the materials today, and it's in a document titled Overview of Silk Meetings.
And just to follow up on that, that was, if you look in your email for the most recent email from me to attendees, it was located in a package that I sent you all this morning.
Hi, this is Cheryl. It's also on our website as well. So
great. This is Carrie. I'm seeing Jamie Liu has a question. Does the Silk have a youth plan they're working on? That is a great question. Currently, we do not have a youth plan, although we are very involved in YLF and have recently appointed a member who can represent youth. And that's something that we're moving toward in the future.
I think I do want to mention that the Silk also is responsible for system coordination and communication as well. So we're actually involved with a couple of the other boards. And one of them relating to YLF is the California Committee on Employment People with Disabilities. So the Silk really does support YLF, and our office manager, Daniel Hess, is on the YLF Governance Committee and is very active. So YLF is, and supporting youth is really important to us.
Any other questions or comments? I know we're running up against the deadline and everybody wants to go and eat lunch and get away from the computer for a minute, but I really want to make sure we address any questions you have. Again, please feel free to reach out to us by email, and I've put those email addresses in the chat box.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to ask too, yesterday morning, we had our session on the Systems Change Hub grant and our upcoming execution of that grant. And there were some questions that kind of were starting to bleed over into asking about the spill and the connection to the Systems Change Hub grant. And I know that you covered it, Carrie. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was completely clear on the spill's role in determining funding and the piece of the onion that Christina described that the spill plays. And again, I realized that it probably was clarified through the presentation. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew where we were at.
Thank you, Russell. This is Christina. I was going to ask the same thing to make sure we covered absolutely everything that anybody was thinking. I also just wanted to add that Peter and Cheryl and Carrie and Fiona, you did an excellent job. And while you had spoke about the Silk not having current openings until the end of 2021 for appointments, just want to point out that California has a lot of commissions, and we are always looking to create opportunities for you all and members of the community that are here and a part of the DO network to appoint and recommend you on those committees and commissions. And we get asked quite often if we know of somebody who wants to serve on something. So if that's something that you're interested in and you want to share that with us, please feel free to do so. I also just want to again point out that I think it was Peter that said it in, early on in his presentation, that the governor's website does have a list of all of those committees and commissions. If you need help navigating which ones are disability specific, we can help you do that. But I also want to say that we don't just want people with disabilities on disability specific committees and commissions. We really want to build disability leadership across the board. And the Silk, while they're very active in the California Committee on the Employment of People with Disabilities and the Youth Leadership Forum Project, they're also very active on CalAble, which is with the Treasury's office, in creating more economic opportunities for people with disabilities to save money when we're on very fixed income. So just want to thank the Silk for also being a part of that, because we definitely want to create economic opportunities for people with disabilities and really significantly change the unemployment rate for our community.
Yeah, really good point, Christina. This is Carrie. And I just want to reiterate that just because we don't have any openings right now on the Silk doesn't mean that you can't get involved. Members of the public are absolutely welcome at any of the Silk meetings. And even if you're not a voting member, you can still add your public comment and participate in the development of the spill and make comments about anything that's happening in the meetings. You don't have to be a Silk member to participate.
Yeah, as Carrie and Christina said, and everyone I think said, kind of the theme is we need your expertise. Okay, so feel free to get involved. And the more boards and commissions you can get on the local and state level, disability specific or boards that are not disability specific, they're both important. And remember, disability crosses every community. So if you want to serve, I'm sure there's a place for you. So I encourage you to really, look at what opportunities are out there that you might be interested in. And if you need support, reach out to us.
And again, this is Carrie. I just wanted to thank you all for sitting through 3 hours of information on the Silk. Basically, I have walked you through our new member orientation. So if you decide to get on board, you have a lot of the information that you would need to get started with, hit the ground running. And I think we made it at 11:59, which is amazing. So I'm going to stop talking finally and let you all take a break and move on with your day. Thank you so much to CFILC for inviting us. We just really appreciated this.
And thank you, Carrie and Peter. This has been a great presentation. It's been something that I think was really refreshing and good to see. So thank you to everyone. Please enjoy your lunch break and just know that this afternoon is going to be a different type of activity. It will be a very hands-on and engaged activity. So take a bit of a break. I know that there's a lot of material to digest, and I can attest to Carrie and Peter's, they're great people to talk to if you have more questions. So just know that they're here to support you, as am I. Enjoy your lunch, and we will see you back at 12:30.